Welcome to Season 2 of Difference Talks, brought to you by the LeBeau Marketing, Communications, and Training Team. Our guests are inspiring people who share their stories of brand differentiation. Based on our book, The Power of Differentiation, our goal is to inspire 1 million people with the message that winning hearts and minds are the first step in growing market share. Now, on with the show.
Welcome, everybody, to Difference Talks. I am Barry LeBeau, CEO and founder of LeBeau Marketing, Communications, and Training. I am the author of The Power of Differentiation. Adam Kingl is our guest today. He is an educator. He is an author, London Business School, Duke, et cetera, et cetera. Great resume. He'll share that with us. We're going to talk about a couple of fascinating insights. One will be about the disruption in today's workplace and how can we engage all generations that are working together. And we're also then going to walk into a very unique territory of creativity and how we can learn from creative organizations and pattern match that with how we run our teams, how we run our companies. So Adam Kingl, fire away. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I'm going to jump in about the whole generational difference and how we can work together. So it's all yours.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for having me. Yeah, I have a multi-stage background. I started my career in theater. I was a director, and then I gradually moved into areas like casting and voiceovers. I was living in California at the time, and over time, I started moving in more into consulting and business management, originally for the entertainment and media industries. What I realized that I kept repeating some of the same themes, that often it was a leadership issue, it was a collaboration issue, it was an innovation mindset issue. So I ultimately became a generalist. That's why I then went to London, did an MBA at London Business School, and started consulting with organizations, becoming more of an industry generalist. And that's what ultimately led me to education, where I'm teaching these topics. And now I'm on the faculty of a number of universities and an author and educator.
Today, we have multiple generations working together, but they might have a different expectation. They may have a different outlook. Can you enlighten our audience on how we can better all work together?
Yeah, it's a great question. Big topic. I was directing a program at London Business School, executive education program, which was called the Emerging Leaders Program. So it was for high potentials, people in their 20s, early 30s. And when the companies would send their colleagues onto the program, their HR departments, their line managers would often tell me, could you fix them? Could you fix the youngsters? Clearly indicating there's a problem here. And so even though the program wasn't about intergenerational collaboration, my curiosity was ignited. And so I started my research at that point, finding out what are their paradigms, this young generation, about work, careers, life, leadership. Because I think the best way to define a generation is the paradigms in which they were raised and in which they first entered the workforce, because those are seminal experiences that then affect how we perceive the world. And I think those differences are more dramatic today than they ever have been in the past. Sometimes I get pushback by people saying, no, Adam, don't worry. When they get married, when they have kids, they'll all become exactly like us. That's not true. That's just not true. This really is a seismic shift in the way we perceive careers and life and leadership. So we see it most immediately in what we still call the resignation crisis. You know, people in their 20s, early 30s seem to be moving from job to job with frightening rapidity.
Mm-hmm.
And companies are really being put out by it, particularly those organizations who have partnership structures where their entire organizational design requires that people stay in those organizations for 10 years, 12 years on a partnership track. And if that whole model is no longer relevant because their job market won't tolerate it, they are facing potentially an existential crisis. So I did surveys, I did interviews, etc. It ultimately all led to a book that I wrote called Next Generation Leadership. And I think the three headlines that I discovered in terms of what is most important in the world of work for young employees is three things. It's development opportunities, because if they are moving from job to job, what they really want is to be more employable. Two, they want culture, a culture that they believe in, they can work in, that rewards them. And number one is work-life balance. Now, at this point, people start to get very anxious and angry. And the
Mhm.
most common thing I hear, which tends to be from an older generation, is saying, oh, so when you say work-life balance, that means they don't want to work the hours I work. They don't want to pay their dues. Do you know how many hours I worked when I was their age? And they get in this big kerfuffle with themselves. But actually, when I asked these young hypos, what do you mean when you say work life balance? More often than not, the answer they gave me was related to place, not number of hours worked. In other words, as digital natives, what they're looking for is flexibility in terms of where work happens, not, oh, I want to work fewer hours. I don't, I'm not going to pay my dues or anything like that. And it totally makes sense, particularly in the white collar world. And of course, I'm admitting there are industries, functions that you have to be there physically, but there are many where you don't have to all the time. Now, I'm saying, do we have the balance right? By no means am I saying people should be working from home 100% of the time. I know that there are disadvantages in doing so, but there are some advantages if we can start to think about where, if we get that balance just a little bit more appropriate and relevant for both employer and employee. So it's been a fascinating journey looking at, it's about over a 15-year journey looking at these generational tensions, yes, but also opportunities.
Many, many times over the last decade or two, I would hear people say, oh, those millennials, or oh,
Yeah.
this generation, whatever.
Yep.
I'd like your feedback on this. I think most of society is turning into that. Most of society is adopting much of the outlooks. And literally, I said to one person a few years ago, wow, we have a 62-year-old millennial then,
Yeah.
because it's altering. What is your input on that? Good, bad, indifferent? Is it the way it's happening and just give up? Is it a good thing?
It is a good thing. And I think you're right. I think your perception is accurate that initially, of course, the status quo resists these new paradigms, but ultimately it starts to adapt it and adopt it. And one of the reasons for that is that Gen Ys or millennials now compose well over half of the global workforce. So at first we could sort of resist and give the contrary perspective because they were in the minority as millennials were entering the workforce, but now they are the majority. So of course that is how the character of our corporations are adapting, and I think it is a good thing because ultimately many of the things that I discussed are about humanizing the workforce a little bit more. I think there's been a long overdue revolution about how we think about management and what it means to be an employee, which we haven't changed very much since the Industrial Revolution, 130 years ago. And so I think ultimately, finally, it is funny enough, the youngest generations that are maybe teaching us what the future of work could look like. And so, yes, I think there are a lot more pluses than minuses.
So you mentioned something. Let's go into that area, which is, okay, the leader, the manager working with the younger person, whatever age they are. What is today's ideal manager or leadership profile? How do they behave?
Mm,
What is their attitude? What is their position? And what role do they play for that individual?
yeah. Well, I think two main headlines I would give you. The first is that ideal manager does not conflate how they should lead with which how they would wish to be led. So often we say the way I lead is the way I hope my leader would treat me. But of course,
Mhm.
we're coming from different backgrounds, we have different expectations, etc. And we never have that, semantic discussion with our followers. Well, what do you want? What do you need? How do you define terms like work-life balance, etc.? And that's what causes a lot of the emotional tension is semantic discord. So that would be first. The second piece, and it's related to the points I mentioned earlier, is that the ideal manager is very tuned into purpose. I heard in one form or another over and over again the idea that companies and leaders saying the only way I feel that I am able to engage and connect now with millennials, with Gen Zs, is that I can create a golden thread between their purpose, why they choose to do what they do and why they choose to do it here, and our organizational purpose. And if I can help create that narrative, if you do what you do, you help us achieve our purpose. And by the way, when we're achieving our purpose, we help you achieve yours. That's a really strong story for why you should never leave this organization. And I think that if nothing else, that's the magic weapon that I think the ideal manager is tuned into. But I find lots of managers who are struggling with that just don't want to have the conversation, aren't curious enough about it, or funny enough, and I don't buy this argument, never have time to investigate and be curious about what meaning means, work meaning is for their teams, for their direct reports in particular.
Today's employee does not respond to what might have been common 20, 30 years ago, which is get this done, do this, do that. You get to keep your job. See you in the morning, right? That doesn't work. We deal with that so often because we look at our company for the differentiation that a company is providing or building or servicing or some technology, something they're doing that is unique, that's not just same old, same old. And once we discover it, we then make sure that we're able to share the story and the meaning behind it, because the third step in that process is to celebrate it with the employee, not just say, hey, by the way, we do this and that, but to say, hey, we're doing these things. Look at the difference that's being made and look at the role that you play in it. You actually have significance. What's your response to that, Adam?
Yeah, and I think it comes back to being curious about why they work here. And so then even if, for example, you're giving people projects, work, which you might think, well, I just have to do this. You have to get this done by this time. If you can just add one little PS to that, because I know what you want to achieve and maybe what your personal and professional goals are for the next year, here's why giving you this project can help you achieve that. Because you're going to be working with these senior colleagues or this interesting customer, and you're developing those skills. And by the way, that might be a project or piece of work that you would have given them anyway, but because now you're contextualizing it around meaning, you all of a sudden are becoming the manager that they engage with, because you're making the assignment of work personal instead of transactional. And it requires just a tiny shift in effort and attention, uh, and doesn't cost anything, by the way.
You're right. It does not cost anything, but it actually takes some effort because you have to actually, as the leader manager, stop and say, okay, am I going to invest that 10 seconds to 45 seconds into thinking about what is the best way that I can express this in a sincere, authentic way so that this individual gets it and they know that they're not just being thrown something to do, that, hey, this actually helps serve you because you want to do this. You love blank. This gives you that chance. So, Adam, what do you tell the super busy manager, leader who's going to say, like you said, you don't buy it. I just don't have time for this. I just need them to get this done. What is your response? And I know you run into leaders like that.
All the time. Time is the number one excuse that any leader or manager gives me for why they wouldn't want to change any habit, be it innovation, collaboration, improving their leadership. I don't have time. To which I would have to say, if you believe that 100% of the composition of your role is about putting out daily fires, you're not a leader. You are still an order taker. At that moment that you were promoted, the way you are perceiving your new job is, I'll do everything I was doing before, but longer, harder, faster. Versus when I'm leading others, these require adaptive skills, potentially reprioritizing my time, getting rid of some habits in order to spend time on others, to be the difference that makes the difference for my team, my department, etc. I mean, and think a little bit about where I want to take my team. What would be my dream team? How would we be collaborating? How would we be working next year? Of course, I think we have to admit that a little bit of invested time in there would have exponential returns a year later or even a few months later. But we don't do that. I mean, there's one of my colleagues, Peter Hinson, wrote this lovely book called The Day After Tomorrow, and he talked about how much time do we as leaders typically spend on issues of today, issues of tomorrow, issues of the day after tomorrow. He doesn't literally mean tomorrow and day after tomorrow. He means like a year from now, 5 years from now, etc. And he interviewed CEOs from all over the world, and he said, how much time should you be spending on today, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow? And the average response he got was something about 70% on today, 20% on tomorrow, 10% on the day after tomorrow. And then he asked him, okay, how much time are you spending on those things? And he said 93% on today, 5% on tomorrow, 2% on the day after tomorrow. 2%. I mean, that's what, like 5 minutes a week or something like that. So we haven't recalibrated at every stage in our careers. Most of us don't seem to have recalibrated how I should be spending my time. And that is why we then conclude I don't have time to do ABC.
When we get back on Difference Talks, we're going to now turn the corner and we're going to talk about a topic that should be very inspirational, and that is how can we as leaders, managers, how can we learn from creative organizations ranging from a Philharmonic to Pixar? Because there are brilliant kernels of genius in the way they do what they do that we can learn from. So we'll be right back on Difference Talks.
Difference Talks is a LaBeouf production. Our focus is differentiation, and we believe it's more important than ever to differentiate your brand and experience. Contact us at labeouf.com for a conversation. We'd love to connect with you.
Welcome back to Difference Talks. Adam Kingl is our guest. He's really been brilliant here. He's thrown us some great kernels of genius. I still love, we need to be the difference that makes the difference or is the difference. I love that. Okay, another thing I love is creativity. Our audience has listened to Emmy Award winners, Grammy Award winners, brilliant designers of automobiles, geniuses. There's a lot to learn from creative people and organizations in how we run our lives and our businesses and our teams every day. Adam, what is your insight on that?
Well, like you, I originally come from an arts background. You with music, me with theater, film, and television. And about 10 years ago, I was reading a study by Boston Consulting Group, BCG, and they were interviewing CEOs from global companies saying, what are your top priorities? And almost 4 out of 5 of them gave some variation of creativity and innovation as a top 3 priority. 4 out of 5 CEOs around the world, creativity and innovation are lifeblood. Nothing is more important. Funny enough, at the same time, McKinsey, separately, their competitor, did a little survey on creativity, but they didn't ask CEOs. They asked the rank and file, just employees of organizations all over the world, but they asked them, how good is your organization at creativity and innovation? And 94% of respondents gave some variation of an answer that resembled, we're crap at it. I don't believe there is a bigger gap in our corporate world today between an aspiration and a reality than innovation. In fact, even though we've been saying for years it's super important, we have been killing it through our processes, through our culture, through our leadership. Here, I'm joining you from the UK. Over the last 5 years, the UK has decreased investment in innovation and R&D by 50%, 50. We are greenwashing the practice of innovation, while at the same time verbally celebrating it. So it's a sad state of affairs, and that's why I started researching creativity and looking at creative companies like Pixar, like Carnegie Hall in New York, Broadway shows, West End shows, Disney, et cetera, et cetera. And I wanted to find, well, what do they do then? Because creativity has to be part of their lifeblood. They must actually value it. Do they do things in their habits, in their conversations, in their processes, which we can extrapolate and use in any function and in any industry? And that's what led me to write my book, Sparking Success, which is all about this. And so it's micro habits most of the time. Often the funny thing is, in my observations and interviews of these highly successful leaders in arts organizations, it isn't, well, sure you can do that if you've got 10 million bucks. Almost always it was just the ways in which they approach problems, the ways in which they talk to colleagues or customers, etc. And I thought, well, that's quite brilliant if we can just go away practicing one or more of those little micro habits. Could that be, as you said before, could that be some of the difference that makes all the difference?
Well, throw some of those micro habits at us. We're ready.
Alrighty. Well, one thing I learned from improv, I went to the original improvisational theater troupe in the UK, the Comedy Store, and I talked to Neil Malarkey, who built that with Mike Myers, the actor that we all know, and and told me a little bit about some of the improv tools that he then brings into the business world. And one of the key ones is the idea of valuing ideas when they're proposed to you. In improv, the phrase is yes and. In other words, if you ever watch an improv scene, they never reject an offer made on stage, right? You always accept the offer. But not only that, you have to build on the offer. It's not just yes, it's yes and. By contrast, how often do we hear the phrase yes, but in a corporate context? Yes, but is the leader's most popular phrase. And of course, it's simply a polite way of saying no. Or even worse, shut up and sit down. Or God help you if your leader says, with respect, or with the greatest respect, then you're probably going to be shown the door.
Or one of my favorites is, that being said, which means I'm not doing what you just suggested.
Exactly. That's right. And so we couch it with polite verbiage, but actually, and so I worked with this Antipodean mining services company with their executive committee. We talked about all kinds of different things. One thing we talked about in that whole week was say yes and more often than yes, but. That was it. A few weeks later, I followed up with their direct reports, the departments in the company, just asking, what are you noticing? Are you noticing any differences, any changes? And everyone was saying, what did you do to them? They're completely different. They're open, they're creative, they're curious, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The only thing that they were doing differently, that exco, is they were saying yes and rather than yes but. Now, the pushback I usually get at this point is, yeah, but Adam, if I say yes and, I have to execute the idea, and we can't execute every crazy idea every bozo comes up with. I'm not saying that. All you're doing is honoring the courage it took someone to come to you with a new idea. Because if you do the opposite, if you say yes, but all the time, what you find is after a while, no one comes to you with ideas anymore. Not that they don't have them, but why bother? Because you not only won't do it, but you will kill their ego with polite verbiage.
Right. And my company conducts hundreds of what we call jam sessions, as a old rock and roller jam session. And one of the things we share in the very beginning with our corporate clients is the most important thing about jamming. And they go, well, what is it? And they never get it right. And it's listening. So often in the corporate world, somebody's giving a presentation and I'm getting ready. I'm going to go tell them what I think. And I'm going to go, wow, I mean, here I go. And then it's my turn. I didn't hear a word that she said or he said. I heard nothing. So we emphasize the first thing in a jam session is listening. 100% of your attention goes to what the individual is saying, because you can expect the same from them when it's your turn. And what happens is it's a yes and it builds, because I'm going, wait a minute, I actually heard what she said. And that kind of works with what I had been thinking about. Okay, what about also doing this? So we find that to be very, very important, which is listening as opposed to getting ready to spew out your greatness. All right, other micro habits you can share with us, Adam.
Yeah, so these are maybe related to processes. The idea of, a lot of organizations say they're creative, but they do massive projects that they invest tons of money in, which might be predicated on studies, but they never manifested the idea. They never prototyped the idea. So another micro habit is, if you're going in new directions, new products, new services, etc., don't go for one big blast, one big idea introduction. Run lots of little ones. Almost every creative leader I talked to said, ultimately, great creative ideas do not appear fully formed like a bolt of lightning from Zeus's hand hitting you in your skull. More often than not, we had to brainstorm 100 ideas, and then we whittled it down to 20, and then we prototyped 15 of those, and then we adapted them, the prototypes, and then we introduced them into a small market, if it was a product or service, but you get the point. And after a year, we have this amazing exponential idea that's going to change the direction of our company. But we never would have identified it as such a year before. So they're doing the hard work. It's actually lazy to just let's have one idea and let's build it out and let's invest a lot of money. It's actually quite risky as well as being lazy.
It is. And in the entertainment and creative worlds, that person who's the great singer, the great performer, the spin that we get from the press is she's amazing and she just came out of nowhere and she's absolutely great. And most of the time, what we have learned is it's the opposite. Like Bob Seger, who was a great rock and roll artist way back in the 60s, and he was an overnight sensation. He went from like nothing to a bunch of hits and great albums. The only problem was, the truth was, he had been touring in tiny little bars and clubs in Canada for 11 years working on those songs. And he was building his following. Just like you said, he was basically test piloting all these different ideas and songs. All right. Any other micro habits you want to share with us?
Yeah, I think a big one is if you can get other people excited about your idea, then it just makes it all easier, because then you aren't the sole sort of person trying to, spit into the wind, but you start to get momentum and people start volunteering their effort. So this piece of advice came to me from Sir Clive Gillinson, who is both the managing director and the artistic director of Carnegie Hall in New York. Very rare that you ever see both of those roles combined in an artistic institution. He does both. And he said, look, in sharing an idea with someone, I start to get a sense if it's exciting enough that they feel we have to do it. And then it goes into the pile of the things that we're going to prototype. Rather than my saying, we're going to do this, I say, could we do this? And if I notice that people are getting excited about it, then I know it's probably going to be easier to sell it to other people, either donors or investors or customers. And so we have to have a lot more conversation about what might be before we immediately try to accelerate into what is. And this he credits this as probably the main reason why Carnegie Hall was able to survive COVID. Because of course, before that, they were completely face-to-face personal experience. The only way that they were able to earn money going virtual was they had to quickly ask lots of great questions like how might, could we, would you be excited if, and have lots of conversations with lots of people quickly. And then they started to see where the momentum and the excitement lay. Too often, I think people believe, to your point, I think earlier, creativity is kind of this solo activity where I sit and I stew and the neurons fire in my head. And then all of a sudden, boom, I've got this brilliant idea. I'm not even testing the concept, let alone the prototype. And it gives me a crowdsourcing answer as to where I actually think I can achieve an innovation.
Connect what we spoke about in the first segment with what we're talking about now. How do you inspire the leaders that you're working with who feel, look, I don't have a lot of time for this back and forth, this rallying the troops around an idea. Look, let's just get this out the door. Come on, we got things we got to do. How do you inspire them to follow some of these micro habits in order to succeed at a level that I'm not even sure they thought was possible?
Yeah. Well, I think it starts by sharing the vision. Like, here's what you might be able to achieve if you start to do some things differently tomorrow than you're doing today. Then they might get excited about that, but then the other part of their brain goes, yeah, but I don't have time, or we have too much pressure, etc. Then I bring in that concept of micro habit. I said, okay, great. I understand. You got a lot going on. So what investment of 10 minutes can you make next week? Just make a 10-minute investment next week of something that you're going to try, like things that we discussed. Could be saying yes and rather than yes but, etc. That you're going to do next week, and then when we see each other in 2 weeks' time, share with me what you did. So I'm going to hold you accountable to that. If you can't give me a 10-minute investment, then yes, I think then perhaps you're a lost cause. But you bought into the vision. If you buy into the vision, and that's a huge reward, and I'm asking you to make a tiny investment, then the ROI is enormous, then come on. You can do this for me. But I think it's baby steps, right? It's helping them see that the innovation journey is little step after little step after little step after little step. It generally is not, to quote the Chinese Communist Party, a great leap forward.
To close with this, I'd like to know if you could share with us what a best day is for you, Adam, meaning you feel you've achieved, but you're not really tired from it. You're energized from what has happened in a given day. Can you share that? It gives a real insight into what you're all about.
Well, first, actually, we just sparked an idea in my head. Is like, what is the symptoms that tells me I've had a really good day? One is that even if I've been done a 12-hour day, I feel more energized at the end than I did at the beginning. But the second piece, and this is what we learned from neuroscience, and I've certainly experienced it, is time seems to have warped. At the end of the day, it seems to me that time either sped up or slowed down. And funny enough, with different people, it goes in different ways. Some people it's accelerating, some people it feels like time slows down. Either way, if you feel that your perception of time has changed, you are in flow. You're in creative flow. And if you're in creative flow, you are probably having a good day because you're tapping in to the childlike wonder of play. So I think that's a big element of what makes a great day. I can work with my clients or my participants or degree students or executive education participants and play. And then you encounter that outcome that T.S. Eliot described in Little Gidding when he said, the end of all of our exploring will be to end where we began and explore the place as if for the first time, like rediscover the childlike wonder of play. And when you see that happening with the adults, typically, that I work with, that the spark is reignited in their eye. There's nothing better.
Well, Adam, I want to thank you. Our audience was really treated to some brilliance today. How can people learn more about you and your books?
Oh, well, they can go to my website. It's just my name, adamkingl.com. I'm on LinkedIn. But I have 2 books out right now, Next Generation Leadership, which is the generational material, and Sparking Success, which is the creativity material. I have a book coming out next year on wellness and resilience. And speaking of creativity, it's taking the form of a cookbook. And it's going to be called Executive Eats, comes out in June.
Brilliant ideas. Adam, thank you so much. Our audience was given an absolute master's course on creativity and on leadership today. Until next time, thank you for joining us on Difference Talks.
Thank you for joining us on Difference Talks. All of us at LeBov are proud to celebrate great people with inspiring messages. Difference Talks was created, produced, engineered, and performed by the LeBov team. Even the music is original. Contact us at lebov.com to learn how to differentiate your brand and give your team a sense of significance and meaning.